Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
This is season 1, episode 7. No, it's not. Oh, what's going on? There's a blooper, Jenny. Season 1, episode 6 of The Mind Matters. I'm Chris Stafford, and we're having the opportunity to sit opposite you and record a show, Jenny.
Yeah, this is special. Special opportunity to be face to face.
And one that we joked about because we always do it down the line, which is fun, but there's nothing like, having fun together in person to record a show. And that's the one thing we don't get to do very often with Wisp, of course, because everything's done remotely unless we're on location, which we will be this weekend, more of which later. The topic that you've picked today is, as usual, very topical, and it's, as usual, a very serious one. We may not have the answers, but you've got a lot of questions that we need to address, so why don't you introduce it?
Well, it's also a bit controversial, and the recent news flood of information regarding Mary Cain, the Nike Oregon Project runner, and her coming, I guess we could say it, coming out with some of her issues and her claims of abuse, physical, emotional, mental, and psychological at the hands of the coach there. And I just think it's a very interesting case, partially because it's so profound and she was such a high-performing athlete. And of course, that's something that we're interested here at Wisp Sports. But it's also because it strays a little bit from what we've been seeing dominate the news cycle with regards to the Me Too movement and a more sexual abuse, sexual harassment. And I think that Mary Cain's case is very important because she didn't feel that there was anywhere to go to talk about her physical abuse wasn't like being traditionally physically abused, being hit or injured. However, there was a ton of weight, shaming, and the abuse came in terms of malnutrition and poor guidance from the people who are telling her, you have to be thinner, you have to be thinner, you have to be thinner. And I think that there are so many female athletes. I think there's probably countless male athletes as well, but so many female athletes who suffer at the advice of the people guiding them. That's not good advice, and they don't know that they can speak out about it. That's what I find so interesting and important about Mary Cain and her case.
Well, I think importantly, it's that very gullible, vulnerable age bracket. We're talking about young teens that are so influenced, and also, they look up to their peers. They think this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They're one of the chosen few, and they don't realize the impact, obviously, because they're not experienced, of the impact that this is going to have on them. Now, you mentioned with Mary Cain, the body image is so important with these young people now, right? I mean, if we don't have enough body shaming without this kind of pressure put on them in terms of their athletic performance, because surely when they're getting fit for that kind of performance, they don't really have a problem with their weight, do they? I mean, especially a runner.
I think it's very individualistic, and most distance runners have a lean body type to begin with. So you don't typically turn on the television or go to a track and field event and see a distance runner, anyone who runs over the mile, I would say, that is not lean and very low body fat, in terms of body mass index. So you just don't really see that. You can see it in other track and field sports, and you can see, heavier athletes in different sports. However, it's really not the norm. And clearly, if you look at the pictures of her throughout her competitive career, she was never fat. Just never. I mean, just wasn't even close. However, she does say that they they continuously told her that in order to run faster, she had to be thinner. It's all over all of her commentary. Mm-hmm. Now, I was a swimmer, and swimmers, are scantily clad, as are track and field athletes, as are gymnasts, figure skaters, now volleyball players. The type of clothing and competitive attire we wear these days is very, very small, right? Because they're looking to reduce drag or wind, any of those things that can help you compete faster and better. And when I was swimming, both in high school and in college, we were weighed on deck. It was, we did, at my club team, we did hydrostatic or underwater weighing, and they rolled this whole thing out on the deck, and everybody went one after the other. And then it was like, oh, so-and-so's such and such a percent. So-and-so, it was just, it was atrocious. We were 16, 17, 18 years old, and we didn't know what 16% body fat meant. We didn't know what 20% body, nobody knew what that meant when you were in high school. And then the guys would say, well, your legs ripple and her legs don't, so she's thinner. So we're taught, both the men and the women, the young men and the young women are taught that, okay, yes, you're supposed to shame somebody else's body because they're getting it from the coaches on deck.
But does that happen in running? I don't know if it does. Unless you're part of the
It happens in every sport. I don't think that there's a sport that is immune, because obviously, Mary Cain's case is really bringing to light that it's thinner.
So they would have done that with her at the Oregon project,
that's where it occurred. Project, and again, I'm not so sure that this. I'd like to say that what I know about this is so far what I've read. Mm-hmm. So what I'm doing is I'm basing some psychological guesses or presumptions or maybe even theories based on what it is we have heard. Mm-hmm. And we've mostly heard from her. What Nike has said so far is that why didn't she come forward sooner? Which is something that I definitely want to talk about.
Right, exactly.
But I don't think that this is a Nike problem. I think that this is a cultural problem. I have been working with young female athletes for 20 years, and I don't think I could count the number of times I have helped an athlete confront and deal with a body shaming, a weight issue, across the board, no matter the sport. Mm-hmm. It happens in every sport, because it's not sport. It's not about sport. Like, the female body image is not about sport. It is about being thin. We went from Marilyn Monroe to Twiggy and never recovered.
Yeah, that's an interesting comparison. It is, because it set the stage, isn't it? So let's just go back to the Nike Oregon project and explain a little bit more about the culture there, because Salazar, who was the coach who was banned during the IAAF World Athletics Championship, he was suspended.
For doping. He led that project, mm-hmm.
right? And so he would have been the major influence, a male influence on a teenager right there. You said this is not peculiar to Nike, but this is a culture apparently that was set up within Nike. And okay, Mary Cain has come forward now after the event, right? Afterwards. So we wanted to talk about, let's get ahead of the game. How do you convince young people that they need to step? Do they know how do they define, how do they identify, recognize that they do need to step up and speak up? And who do they turn to? If they don't feel they can turn to, obviously, the system they're in, right, or the coaches, the people that we've talked about in the past, that they should be trusting, that relationship is critical. Or their parents, maybe they can't get them. So who do they go to if they don't have a sports psychologist?
That's a super question. It's very, very layered. So one of the things is that I think that Nike was trying to create a culture of excellence, which is okay. what the company does. I don't think it's any different from Under Armour or Asics or Puma or any other apparel or sports shoe company. I really don't think that they are extraordinary in that. Perhaps they're extraordinary in their market leadership, which created funding mm-hmm. to be able to do something like the Oregon Project, right? Which was, like that was heavily funded. That was an expensive project. Those were expensive coaches. Those were expensive athletes.
So you've got to have a company with deep pockets, right?
So they had, and they had enough
influence
and commitment.
Okay.
Right. So, I know that this happened at Nike, but like I said, I don't think that this was all a Nike issue. I think that we have, over the course of the last, 50, 70 years, we have really lost our way with regards to everything being about winning, right? So our culture, especially in sport,
especially in this country.
Yes.
Well,
what she says with a British accent.
I do, but I do see both sides.
I completely agree. I completely agree. Right. So Americans are obsessed with winning. Yeah. We are completely obsessed with winning, and that takes your breath away. It takes your mind away. It takes your decision making away. It can heavily influence behaviors, actions, and poor guidance.
Yeah, poor guidance, but again, the parents are one step behind this, right, with these young people. At a time when they could be more involved. If they were, does that come back to education of the parents, right?
So this is really hard for parents, okay? Because being a great sport parent is 1 minute being all in your young athlete's face, and the next minute getting as far away from them, giving them as much space as you can. So these waters are so incredibly difficult to navigate. So what happens for a youth sport parent is typically one of continuous blindsiding, right? So their kid is all of a sudden this phenom, or they've got deep pockets and the coach sees the deep pockets as the phenom. I have seen that happen time and time again. I've seen a Grand Prix trainer do that to a young rider and go up to their parents and say, your young rider is going to be in the Olympics. That young rider needs to buy this horse from me. Oh, go get a second mortgage so you can do that. I've seen that happen. Okay. Yeah. So the blindsiding is whether or not the young athlete has talent, it can happen. And who are the parents supposed to trust? Right? They're supposed to trust the coach. Yeah. So, but where did the coach get their ethics from? Is the coach trustworthy? Quite honestly, I left UCLA to go take a semester off and train for Olympic trials because a coach told me that they could help me make the Olympic team, and it wasn't even remotely true. Now, in their heart of hearts, they wanted it to be true, but it just wasn't, Now, was he bad? No, he was trying. He was just wrong. It wasn't the best program for me. He wasn't a sprint coach. I would have fared much better if I had stayed with a coach that I already been with for years. It was very bad judgment on my part. But again, I was 20, and someone says, I promise I'm going to help you make the Olympic team. Yeah. How do you say no to that?
Yeah. And let's look at exactly. So you're tunnel visioned in a way, aren't you? When you're a teenager and you think about success. I reflect, easily on my experience as a teenager. I was that's all I wanted to do was succeed and establish myself as a professional rider. But when you look at the other side of the fence too, with the coaches and trainers, whatever their sport, they are driven by obviously results and their paycheck, but also by their reputation then, because their success with a Mary Cain is the building block to getting even greater athletes and building their roster as well. And we often see, certainly in equestrian sport, the turnover then, when you hear about these young riders, students, that get to the barn, they don't spend what we call the barn time. Yeah, which would be
not
the time,
anymore.
Not anymore, because the trainer is so driven to wait. Little Susan comes along, has a riding lesson. Mum is there to pick her up in the car. She gets off the horse. She doesn't even go with the horse and develop a relationship with the horse. And it's like any other sport. You've got to have you've got to be able to build an athletic career beyond performance, beyond the running around the track or riding the horse or swimming in that pool or whatever it is. It's much more than that, right, to be a rounded athlete. So some of the blame, I'm coming back to the coaches and the blame on the coaches and the trainers. I'm gonna blame them a little bit because they're just driven by the dollar sign, right?
Some of them are. Yes.
Oh, some.
The
Thank you.
one. Okay,
Thank you.
I think that the ones that get in trouble are. You know, I've seen countless amazing, wonderful, really correct, mindful coaches, and the thing to me, one of the qualities that makes a coach absolutely fantastic is their system and their team, right? So like a coach cannot be everything to one person. Absolutely not. Now, Mary Cain had a team. She had a nutritionist, she had a sports psychologist, she had her coach, there was an assistant coach. But there were a couple of problems with that coaching staff. So the first one, very obviously now, perhaps not then, was that there was not a woman on staff anywhere near her. Okay.
Right.
16-year-old girl moving away from home. And now she's under the guidance of a half dozen men who are 2 to 3 times her age, at least 3 times her, and with no ability to relate to her. She stopped menstruating. How do you tell a 45-year-old man, well, I haven't gotten my period in months?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so for anyone who is accusing her of this being her fault because she didn't come forward, we've got to have a little compassion for her cognitive development, right? At 16 years old, you're probably 60 to 65% cognitively developed. I mean, how do you... It's young.
But the implications that you mentioned about menstruation, I mean, this is a real problem with young girls, right? It affects their menstrual cycle, and that could have implications for childbearing, obviously, and fertility.
Oh, for sure. Well, you stop producing estrogen. When you stop menstruating, you stop producing estrogen. That's bone health. She broke 5 bones.
Exactly.
She's a runner.
Yeah.
And she broke bones. And every picture of her, she's super thin, and she's wearing tape. Like, she's holding herself together because without estrogen, your bone health deteriorates significantly. So her bone density has been something that she talks about. She's worked very hard to get back under control and back to a healthy level. So there's many, many things that happen during amenorrhea or the cessation of menstruation.
Right. So where are the parents in all this?
Yeah. So this is difficult. From what I understand with Mary Cain's case, either one or both of her parents are physicians. Now, right, so Chris just rolled her eyes, like with her mouth agape. You did not know that. Now, here's what was happening, is that the coach was calling her parents and saying, she's set to see this doctor, she's set to see that doctor, we've got her set up for this medication and that medication. Those calls were not in Mary's radar, so she didn't know about the calls. And then what was happening was she was going to see doctors receiving samples. She wasn't having blood work. She was put on blanking. She was put on to not get pregnant.
On the pill.
She was put on the pill.
Yes.
Wow, that was a huge blank. She was put on birth control.
That was slow for
you, I know,
Jenny.
super slow. She was put on birth control without any blood work. Oh. Right? And so and she was given doctor's samples. So she wasn't even appropriately administered medicine. That's not medical care.
No.
Now, that's all I know about the details. Okay. So if you're a parent and you're getting this call from a coach and everything's okay, and the coach is telling you as the athlete, this is how we do it, this is okay, then, you can see where those gaps are created.
Do you know, this makes me think of archaic Russian training methods.
Yeah.
That years ago they might have done, they might still do some of those things now, but this is not the Western world. Well,
it's not, but so, okay, this is a completely, tangential example, but if we look at the fall of Bernie Madoff, right, this slippery slope that happens you go cascading down there very, very quickly. You talk to anyone who knew Bernie Madoff, they loved him. Yeah. He was so well loved and so well respected. But he just took one step. So Dan Ariely is a researcher at the University of North Carolina, and he has a deception lab. He is one of my favorite social psychologists of all time. And he talks about lying, and he always says the first one's the hardest. But then we decrease exponentially in terms of our discomfort with regards to lying, the more lies we tell. So the more lies you tell, the more comfortable they become.
Yeah, but my grandfather always used to say you've got to have a damn good memory to be a liar.
For sure.
All right, so there's
that. So that's how these things can happen. And who knows what happened to Salazar? Who knows what type of pressure Nike was putting on him? Maybe he was in tremendous financial debt, and this was something he had to make happen. We don't know the side of his story yet. We can look at him like he's a bad actor, and he certainly is occurring that way, but we don't know why he behaved the way he did. Mm-hmm. There were several other people supporting his cause. She wrote and spoke about a sports psychologist who discovered she told him she was cutting herself, and they said, okay, time to go to bed.
Self-harm. She expressed suicidal ideation and self-harm, and he said, okay, time to go to bed. Now, he was not a licensed clinical psychologist. Now, the truth is that in the world of sports psychology, there are two types of sports psychologists. There are clinical psychologists who practice sports psychology, like me. And then there are sports psychology consultants who have degrees from exercise science and kinesiology departments, and they do not have clinical psychology training. Now, there are some of our best sports psychology consultants in the country come from that model. Mm-hmm. So it's not that you have to be a clinical psychologist to be a great sports psychologist, but he used the word psychologist and allowed her to believe that. So to me, that's unethical and harmful, right? Our ethical considerations as professional practitioners exist for this very reason. Yeah. The nutritionist on the staff there was not fully licensed. So there were some huge gaps, right? Maybe these were friends of Salazar. Maybe, who knows? But there was a miss in oversight. So that's the danger, isn't it? It's like any coach-trainer selection, right? Unless the parents or the athlete do their due diligence and know what they're looking for. It's one thing to say that, but it's one thing to know what you're looking for, right? Are these people bona fide? Are they professionals and in the right, area? Especially as you say, she had a team there of people.
Listen, that would sound great to any parent.
Right, right?
Yeah.
So one of the points you were making to me before we started recording was, some of the things like that athletes can do is listen to your gut and your instinct, but you're so influenced at that age. I mean, it's one thing for you and I as mature adults to say, oh, listen to your gut. How many times do we say that to each other, to one another or to ourselves, that, okay, listen to your gut, listen to your instincts.
Right.
But you talk about cognitive development.
Right. Your instincts develop over time for sure.
Absolutely. And with experience.
And I'm thinking about a parent who wouldn't know the difference in a sports psychology consultant and a clinical psychologist. They just wouldn't. They wouldn't know. Now, we do have a governing body in sports psychology, and they work very, very hard to prevent these types of mistakes from happening. So this was, I was super disappointed to see this in my profession.
So if you had a call from a Mary Cain at the age of 16 or 17, and she says, I'm not sure about, what my coach is telling me. She's telling me that, or she or he is telling me that I need to lose weight, and I keep losing weight, and I'm missing my periods, but they're telling me that's the right thing to do, and I'm winning, and I'm going to be on the Olympic team, and you're so euphoric about your potential and your whole sort of sports world, everything you wanted to do at that young age is you're surrounded by it. You're in a unique position. What do you say to you? What do you say to those, the Mary Cains at that point as a psychologist?
Well, with Mary Cain, where she is now, post event, all of these things, she's already quit. She's deep into her physical and I suspect psychological recovery. Had she called me before she had quit or any of these things had happened, I would have asked her to ask a lot of questions, right? I actually have a young cross-country runner, high school athlete who I'm working with right now. She doesn't have any of the depth of these issues. She doesn't have anyone fat shaming her, telling her she needs to be thinner. However, she doesn't have the best guidance from, her high school coach. Because high school coaches are like, the chemistry teacher who loves running or something like that. They're not equipped for a high performing athlete. So she went and got an external coach that made the high school coach feel threatened. Then she, has a running partner that she runs with. So she's getting advice from multiple areas. However, they're all sort of competing with each other. So what I've been doing is working with her mom to help her ask the right questions. Right? She did have a physical issue. And so we worked to, okay, what's the best way to handle this? How do we get the best advice and get the truth? So it's very difficult with Mary Cain. There were so many things that went wrong all at the same time, and it wasn't until she started breaking bones and running very poorly that someone said, okay, what's going on here? So yeah,
it's gone too far down the track, no pun intended,
correct.
right?
And
so what seems to me to be really important is potentially, and I don't know if this happens in reality, you mentioned that you're doing this with a client right now, is having a relationship with, as a sports psychologist, or it might be somebody else. But somebody who is the go-between between the parent, but talking to the parent and making sure those messages from the athlete are coming back to the parents, who are ultimately, they're teenagers. But even if they're over 18, whatever their age, that there is some point in between that is safe for a young girl to go to.
Yeah, and I think the first thing to think about as the parent or even the young athlete is, what's the motive of the person helping me? What's their motive?
Totally.
Yes. Like, is this a career move for them? Are they being financially compensated?
Right.
And I think that in plenty of cases, the motive is ego. Very, very unfortunately, right? So
comes back to what I was talking about, not all trainers and all coaches, but, what is their motive? Is it, the turnover? Is it the dollar at the end of the day? Is that their main motivation?
Right. And the dollar and the ego can have separate cases for themselves, right? So, someone can be in financial straits and make bad decisions based on that. And someone can be very ego driven and make bad decisions based on that. I think that the young athlete that I'm working with hasn't been working with her high school team at all. She's been working with an external coach, and she's been doing great, right? And so rode on the bus one meet because she had to. And the high school coach just got all up in her face with, statistics and how fast the other girls are. And really, the young athlete felt as though he was trying to get in her head to have her run slowly to prove that he was a better coach, which is so incredibly sad to me. A 45-year-old man toying with a 16-year-old because his ego can't take it that he's just not a high-performing coach. So what? Yeah. You know what? One of my best friends ran in high school and still talks about the greatness of her high school coach and how he inspired her and motivated her and was the first person to help her believe in herself. And, everybody's got a role. Everybody has a role to play in everybody, as a leader or as a coach or as a teacher or a mentor. You have a role to play, and sometimes it's not going to be standing on the deck of the Olympics with them.
Right. And it might be their one opportunity. If it's a high school, like I can think of, going back to high school myself, how whatever my athletics coach said, I mean, she did all sports, right? And whatever she said, I was like,
you hung on every word.
God, every word she did. She told me to run around that track or go training or do this or
you did
hockey, whatever she said I was going to do. And the same when I went to equestrian school, whatever she said, it's like, you hang on everything.
On it for sure.
But interesting, there's two women, right? I didn't have a male coach, and not to be sexist, but I think this is important. The gender.
I think it's important
role
too.
And the relationship is going to be different because, as you said at the top of the show, you're not going to be able to go to an older male and say, look, I haven't had my period for 3 months, you're not going to have that conversation. And do you want to go back to your mother if you haven't had that conversation with your mother about
Right. I mean, how many of your friends, I mean, I remember being in high school, us all starting our period, and did you tell your mom yet? No, I haven't told my mom yet. Why would I tell my mom, I've got an older sister. I just went and hijacked her products, I mean, it's
a different conversation.
It's a very different conversation. And so some of the things to begin to think about it as you are a young athlete or a parent of a young athlete to try and venture out. Or even, I guess this would be really applicable for coaches too, is what's your motivation and what role is it really appropriate for you to play? So I think that, a lot of coaches become overfaced because they try to take on too many roles, and that can cause damage. You look like you have a question.
No, I was just thinking, just to wrapping up now, Jenny, because this is a conversation we could have for another 2 hours and 3 hours and so on. But to keep this in, in a manageable segment, and we'll come back to things like this too, because they are topical and there's so many different layers to this, right? We could really break it down. But just for some takeaways here, you've talked about, listen to your body image and listening to your body and your body needs. If you're missing your periods and if something that the coach says you just doesn't feel right, have someone to go to, right? Know who that go-to person is. But talk about it before it becomes a problem and you get as far as Mary Cain, right?
Yeah, I would say talk about it as it starts to occur as a problem, right? So the female athlete triad is something that many physicians, primary care physicians, and sports physicians are trained to look out for. I'm going to see if I can remember the 3 pieces. Stress fracture, amenorrhea, and I can't. And I think there's a psychological component with the female athlete triad. Okay. So really, it's when your body starts to change. So when you stop having your period, when you start getting more frequently injured. Okay, so an increase in injuries is a huge red flag. The minute your injuries start to you spend more time being injured than not injured, that's where you need to go see someone. And you need to go see someone or a series of someones until that question gets answered. So listening to your body as a young athlete, that you can trust, right? You may not be able to trust your gut with regards to what other people are telling you, but you can trust your body. Have a number of people to go to. Even if it's a neighbor, if it's another person on the team, if it's an alumni.
Or your aunt.
Or your aunt, right? Absolutely. Have someone to go to. Now, collect different opinions. You may not listen to them all. You may only pick one to listen to. But if you're collecting different opinions, then at least your perspective is widening. And then the ability to agree to disagree, right?
It's confidence, isn't it, right? Are you going to stand up to your coach?
Yeah.
And say, well, I'm not sure about this. I think taking on your coach comes down to instinct and confidence. Confidence at that age?
Yeah. Well, listen, so if you don't have it, then you grab an adult that does.
It does, yeah.
Right? So with my young high school athlete, I encouraged her mom to talk to the coach because she can, right? As a grown woman, she can walk up to a grown man and say, hey, you know what? Don't get in my kid's head right before a race. That's not fair. So you have to have, we're not meant to do this alone. We're really not meant to do this alone.
That, I think, is really important, right? And a really, really, really important message to young people. We're not meant to do this alone. Just because you're off to college or you're off to Nike Oregon Project or some, coaching environment, which is going to be the start of your professional career, break records, make you an Olympian, and all the rest of it. You're not alone. Okay, the performance on the track or in the pool or wherever it is, yes.
That's you.
But there's
yeah,
that's just such a small
piece. Yeah, and it's you supported by your entire team and everyone who's ever contributed to that. So it's we're not meant to do this alone. Please don't feel like you're doing this alone. Mm-hmm. Reach out. I think if I asked Mary Cain today, when would you have spoken up about this? When should you have confronted Salazar? I shudder to think at how many years ago she might have said that.
Something. Yeah. I think that's a final note here because I'm looking at a poster in your office here. You need to believe in yourself, trust yourself, and trust your instinct, and have someone to go to throughout your career. I mean, throughout wherever you are, whatever coach you're with. Don't rely on that one-to-one because I know I did. I know I did, and because they were everything.
Sure, we all have at some point.
And then I'd go back to my parents and make out this person was my God.
Sure.
In that relationship, because when you think about it in terms of the adult relationships you're developing as a teenager, this is one of the first big ones, right? Because it's someone outside the family who's believing in you. And,
very formative.
very formative. What else should we be covering?
Well, we should be covering how to do this as a coach. You know, how do you do this? How do you manage a high-performing athlete? How do you take that kind of pressure? You know, we're not really thinking about the pressure that coaches endure. And as a sports psychologist, much of my work has, especially with teams, which just surprised me to no end, was when I do work with teams, the majority of my work is with the coach. I mean, this is coaches, especially like I've done a ton of work with equestrian trainers, which are the coach, and we call them trainers in the equestrian world. And they are not trained, designed, educated, informed, or even skilled as a sports psychologist or a psychologist. And, you know, how many people fall apart when they're, you know, training or competing at their sport? Doesn't matter. Horses, swimming, track and field, football, people fall apart when they do that. Coaches are not equipped for that. It's part of the reason why I am so happy to see the expansion of the career of sports psychology and how much great work we're able to do. There's, of course, bad actors everywhere you go and in every profession, but that's our role. You know, that's the role of sports psychologists, is to do the stuff that the coach is not supposed to be doing. Yeah. You know, a trainer is supposed to be training the horse and teaching the person to ride and helping them ride better and helping them advance their skills. But if they're falling apart, if they're scared, if they're nervous, that's not their role.
Yeah.
Right?
Coaches are not trained as sports psychologists. I think that's maybe the next topic then. We'll address the coach on the next episode, which will be episode 7. Just
7? You sure?
Remind myself where we are in this. We are going to do 8 episodes this season, leading up to the end of the year. So that's season 1 of The Mind Matters, here with Dr. Jenny Susser. And then we're going to do something completely different just for fun over the holidays. So by the time this goes out, it'll be next week that we will... it's going to be the end. This is episode 6.
I can't remember birth control. You can't picture
exactly.
a calendar.
I don't know where I am in the calendar, Jenny. So this is episode 6, 2 more episodes, and then we're going to take a break with this show over the holidays, come back in the new year. 2020 is a big year in sport, being an Olympic year. And then we're also going to throw at you a different kind of podcast that Jenny and I have talked about doing because we enjoy podcasting together. So we're going to do something completely different. We actually don't even know what that looks like.
I for sure don't know what that looks like. So,
since we have no clue what we're going to talk about, and the show doesn't even have a name yet, so we're just putting it out there that we will be doing this. But in the meantime, in between that, we will be throwing at you just a one-off, like, end-of-the-year review, holiday special, call it what you will, and it will not necessarily be sports psychology. This is going to be something completely different. So that could be absolutely anything that we want to talk about. But I think we'll probably look back at the year. You know, it's been an interesting year.
And it's the end of a decade as well.
And it's the end of a decade. All right, what better excuse? Jenny, remind everybody where they can follow you, stalk you on social media.
Stalk me on social media quite easily. drjenny.com, Facebook, Dr. Jenny R. Susser, Twitter at Dr. Jenny Susser.
All right, and we are, as always, at With Sports on your social media platforms and online at withsports.com. If you've got any comments, questions, or suggestions for Jenny and I as to what we might be able to talk about, we would welcome those. You can drop us an email to info@withsports.com. Until the next time, thanks for listening. Goodbye for now.